All right, let's open our Bibles to to Esther chapter 1. Let's turn to Esther chapter 1, and this is going to be a review at the beginning about where we've been. You guys know that after 7 days of extravagant partying in the capital city, the king of Persia, Ahasuerus, has a pretty crazy idea. He wants to invite someone to come up to the party. Who is that? Vashti, yeah. His wife, his queen. And what's wrong with that? Who doesn't want their wife to be with them? What's the problemo? She doesn't want to. Yes, his goal is to show her off. Exactly. He wants to show her off because the text says that she's lovely to look at. So his plan is to exhibit her before probably hundreds of men. And we know that King Ahasuerus is drunk, right? So what do you think his buds are? Probably drunk too. Yeah, so this is not like a camaraderie probably. He wants her to exhibit herself before these drunken men. And kind of with this touch of overkill, how many guys does he send to go fetch her? 7 guys, yeah. So 7 guys, go get my girl and bring her up here. And but what does she want to do? She does not want to go, so she refuses to obey. She refuses to comply with the most powerful man in the land. Now, what is he trying to do? He's trying to harness and muster support to go into Greece, right? So he needs his army to obey him. And what happens when even his wife doesn't obey him? His pursuit for power is reversed with embarrassment, right? I mean, he's looking like a loser in the home. And he's really making some poor decisions here. But he's got this reversal of power with now embarrassment. He's got a dilemma. And so no wonder, verse 12 then of chapter 1, this is where we left off last week. No wonder in Esther 1, verse 12, it says that the king became enraged and his anger burned within him. How is he going to get his army to follow him when those closest won't, right? And now, last week we spent a long time making sure that we're cautious on how we interpret the book, right? Is the author villainizing Vashti for her marital rebellion? No. Is the author applauding Vashti for her noble character? No. You know, those things could be the case. We just don't know. And so that is to miss the point. I think it's more important to realize that the sociological division in the book is that there are God's people and there are not God's people, right? Vashti is Gentile, Ahasuerus is Gentile, and Esther and Mordecai are Jews. Yeah, they are a part of God's covenant community. And so I think it's more wise to see that we've got sociological differences under Jew and Gentile, not necessarily gender. This is not about girl power and stuff like that. That is to miss the point. I think what we should see, like we pointed out, is that what appears to be seemingly insignificant events actually have tremendous consequences and ramifications, right? Because you've got Ahasuerus. Does he have his own motives? Yeah, he's got his own selfish motives and his own selfish decisions, and that kicks off a chain of events. What about Vashti? Does she have her own motives for not coming? Yeah, maybe good, maybe bad. The author doesn't say. I think good motives, and she doesn't come. But regardless, that kicks off another chain of events that will change her life forever, which we'll see here in a minute. And then all the while, these non-God worshipers making their own human decisions with their own selfish motives, God, all the while, is orchestrating a sequence of events to create a void for the queen to be filled by a person that he has chosen to change the course of history that stretches to the salvation of his people. That's amazing. And so that's what we saw last time. What do we call that? This is God's active providence. It's providentially working through the lives of his people and people who don't know him. Like, he is controlling all events and governing them to the security of his own people. Now, let's pick up where we left off, and we're going to begin reading. Why don't we read verse 12, because it really sets the finishing context for where we're going. So follow along. I'm going to read verse 12 to the end. So, but Queen Vashti refused to come at the king's command delivered by the eunuchs. At this the king became enraged, and his anger burned within him. Then the king said to the wise men who knew the times, for this was the king's procedure toward all who were versed in law and judgment, the man next to him being Karshena, Shethar, Admatha, Tarshish, Meres, Marsena, and Memucan, the 7 princes of Persia and Media, who saw the king's face and sat first in the kingdom. According to the law, what is to be done to Queen Vashti because she has not performed the command of King Ahasuerus delivered by the eunuchs? Well, then Memucan said, in the presence of the king and the officials, not only against the king has Queen Vashti done wrong, but also against all the officials and all the peoples who are in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus, for the queen's behavior will be made known to all women, causing them to look at their husbands with contempt, since they will say, King Ahasuerus commanded Queen Vashti to be brought before him, and she did not come. This very day, the noble women of Persia and Media who have heard of the queen's behavior will say the same to all the king's officials, and there will be contempt and wrath in plenty. So if it please the king, let a royal order go out from him, and let it be written among the Jews of the Persians and the Medes, so that it may not be repealed, that Vashti is never again to come before King Ahasuerus. And let the king give her royal position to another who is better than she. So when the decree was made by king is proclaimed throughout all his kingdom, for it is vast, all women will give honor to their husbands, high and low alike. Well, this advice pleased the king and the princes, and the king did as Memucan proposed. He sent letters to all the royal provinces, to every province in its own script, and to every people in its own language, that every man be master in his own household and speak according to the language of his people. Oh, wow. I think it's comical that many empires, they have to have laws, right? They have to have laws to govern society. That's pretty normal. But sometimes laws can be a display of dominance, an attempt to really show who's in control. But when there's too many laws, that can sometimes backfire. And backfires like a petty bureaucracy. I'm surprised to learn about some crazy laws that seem like just a ridiculous minutia. Listen to some of these. In Arizona, did you know it's illegal for a donkey to sleep in a bathtub? There's a story behind it. That's crazy. Why does that even... In Alaska, it's illegal to be intoxicated while in a bar. Don't you think that's where the intoxication is going to take place? In the UK, it's an offense to handle salmon suspiciously. What does that mean? That's Section 32 of the Salmon Act. In Arkansas, Section 1854, it's illegal to honk a horn near a sandwich shop after 9 p.m. In Pennsylvania, Section 105.13, it's illegal for any convicted felon to operate a bingo game or to have interest in any proceeds concerning games of chance. I mean, that kind of makes sense. I don't want somebody messing with my bingo game. In fact, North Carolina is concerned with bingo too. North Carolina says it's illegal to play a bingo game for over 5 hours at a time. You got to have your bingo, I guess. In Australia, until 1998, according to the Electricity Safety Act, it was illegal to change a light bulb in your own house unless you were a licensed electrician. A little oversight in the law, I guess. In Georgia, it's illegal to stash an ice cream in your pocket on Sundays. Who would ever do that? In Colorado, you can't go horseback riding intoxicated. Now, one would think Colorado, where marijuana was trailblazed as legalized, you'd think that they'd ease up on the intoxication while horseback riding, but I don't think so. In Samoa, it's illegal to forget your wife's birthday. Now, that would be a problem. Penalties more than the silent treatment, I'm sure. In Iowa, it's illegal for a piano player. I can sympathize with my people. It's illegal for a piano player to charge money for a performance if he has only one arm. As if his life isn't hard enough already, he can't charge money. In Alaska, it's illegal to feed alcohol to a moose. Now, the real curiosity, why are grizzly bears not included in the prohibition, I think? In Milan, Italy, with the exception of funerals and hospitals, for everyone else, it's a legal requirement to smile at all times. Do you think you could really enforce that? Now, that's just an example of where we're headed here, because that's where these laws are just pushed into Persia. In Scotland, it's a legal requirement to let anyone use your toilet if they ask. And in Minnesota, this is the best one. In section 343.36, it's illegal for anyone to participate in a contest in which one tries to capture a greased or oiled pig, or a greased or oiled chicken or turkey. I don't know how the European Commission regulates this one, but for bananas, there's a Banana Act. Number 2257.94 requires bananas to be free from malformation or abnormal curvature of the fingers. They shall have a minimum length of 14 centimeters. That's ridiculous. And you can see how all this petty bureaucracy really is not a sign of power. It's a sign of weakness. Let me remind you of verse 8. Look back here. This is what we saw last week. Chapter 1, verse 8. This is the same thing in the 480s BC in Persia. It says that drinking was according to this what? Edict. That's law. And so drinking had to conform at the level of the king's law. There is no compulsion. Even the drinking at a party must conform to his law. That word edict or law or decree happens 19 times in the book of Esther. So this is a theme that we'll see throughout here. He's issuing edicts, he's issuing decrees. What shall I do according to the law? It's a big deal in Persia. Laws are a huge deal. But power that must regulate conformity at the level of drinking, it just is a sign of weakness because he's regulating such minutia. It's not power. And so according to Ahasuerus, a law was required to ensure that no one was under compulsion to drink whenever the king drank, which is what you do. If the king drank, then you would drink. The king would pick up his glass, you'd pick up his glass. And the law says, you don't have to do this, not under compulsion. It's just difficult not to chuckle when you read this type of stuff. And I mentioned a long time ago when we started this that in many ways, the book of Esther is like a satire. There's a lot of comedy rolled into this. And you just have to think about it a little bit. But the point of verse 8 here is that all of life in Persia is regulated by whatever the king's laws are. Whatever he dictates happens. And it's the same in what we read today. It's the same in verse 15. What does it say? Verse 15, the king says, according to the what? According to the law, what is to be done to Queen Vashti because she has not performed the command of King Ahasuerus? Let's not overlook the fact he's talking about his wife. Well, what does the law say that I got to do about my wife? You see, his whole way of thinking is about edicts and laws. I rule from Pakistan to Turkey, but what does the law say I should do about my wife? He's not a really independent thinker. He's got to go to these 7 wise men to figure out what to do with the domestic dispute. And so, does this guy need a law really to govern his marital relationships? Not really, but in his mind, he does. And so, look at verse 19. We come up with this solution. Verse 19, this is Memucan's recommendation. If it please the king, let a what? Royal order go out from him, and let it be written among the laws of the Persians and of the Persians and the Medes, so that it may not be repealed that Vashti, and this, by the way, is the first time she's not listed as Queen Vashti, that Vashti is never again to come before King Ahasuerus. Now, you'd think that Ahasuerus would take a little more personal approach, don't you think? I mean, He's got some trouble with his wife, and he's going to his wise men for what, instead of pursuing reconciliation, and let's just do an irrevocable royal decree. Yeah. And that sounds like a good idea. Let's just demote her. So verse 20 says that when the decree was made by the king is proclaimed throughout all his kingdom, for it is vast, all women will give honor to their husbands. Problem solved. What? What do you guys think? Is that an effective law? Can you regulate that kind of stuff? That's about as silly as regulating that people smile in Italy, right? You can't regulate this kind of... What does he imagine he can do? Yeah, control people. Exactly. He is imagining that he can control people and circumstances and their feelings. We'll just make it a law that they have to honor and respect their husbands. Problem solved. Yeah. What could go wrong, right? I mean, whenever you're being dishonored or disrespected, just go look at the law. You got to honor. Oh, okay, fine. You know, like that's not how it works, right? You can't do this type of thing. And so this exposes the type of reasoning in the royal court of Persia. It's really arrogant, very arrogant and impotent that this is how they reason. Who's the mastermind, by the way, of this idea? You guys notice he's got these 7 guys, and the guy at the end of the list, Memucan, I guess. Memucan, I don't know how to pronounce it. But yeah, he's the mastermind. Verse 16, it says it right there. Then Memucan said in the presence of the king and the officials, I mean, man, he is suspicious. Not only against the king has Queen Vashti done wrong, but against all the officials and all the peoples who are in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus. I mean, in his mind, what began as a domestic dispute between 2 people is now an empire-wide crisis. You think he's exaggerating a little bit? I mean, he's really nervous that some people are going to hear about Queen Vashti. What's his motives? What are his concerns? What is he afraid of? Probably. I think you're right. I think his what? His reputation? Yeah. Yeah, he's nervous about something. He's taking Vashti's non-compliance personally. He's taking her actions as a personal offense. Her actions against the king affect all of us. Okay, really? And so that's what his way of thinking is. He's terrified that Vashti's just say no policy is going to affect his house. I bet that's really the case, Janice. Yeah, he thinks that women everywhere are obeying under duress, and they're just waiting for one brave soul like Vashti to emerge and lead the rebellion against their terrible husbands. Maybe that's what he's afraid of. And so, he universalizes the problem. Look at verse 16 again. I mean, he is so using the superlative here. He says that when they hear about, it's not only that Queen Vashti has done wrong to the king, but also against all the officials and all the peoples who are in all the provinces. I mean, he is really manipulating this story. He's saying that disobedient babes are going to be a threat to our authority. You know, do you see what he's thinking? This is what he's afraid of. Oh, the horrors in our home. We got to have a law about this. You see, this is really silly thinking, right? And then he is afraid of this Vashti's influence, verse 17. And the queen's behavior will be made what? Known to all. See, he wants to conceal this. I think we should conceal this. We don't want this to be known to all women, causing them to look at their husbands with contempt, so that they may, since they will say, King Ahasuerus commanded Queen Vashti to be brought before him, and she did not come. And look at verse 18 again. This very day, the noble women of Persia and Media who have what? Heard. Do you see? He doesn't want them to know, and he doesn't want them to hear. That's what he is trying to get at. When you get all the way to verse 19, here's his proposal again. This proposal. Therefore, if it please the king, let a royal order go out from him, and let it be written among the laws of the Persians and the Medes, so that they may not so it may not be repealed, that Vashti is never going to come before King Ahasuerus, and let the king give her royal position to another who is better than she. Your empire is in trouble. This domestic dispute between man and wife, it has huge ramifications. You got to get this under control. Crack the whip, brah. You've got to get this under control. All women must know that Vashti has been dumped. You got to get this under control. All women must know that harsh consequences are the result of disobedience. All women must be, intimidated to honor their husbands. I mean, isn't that lovely? Isn't that what all husbands want? All husbands want government-imposed obedience and love and respect and honor. I mean, nothing says I love you more than, the law says it. I've got to do it, right? And so that's what he's trying to get across, and that's what verse 20 says at the end, right? That he says, so when the decree made by King Ahasuerus proclaimed throughout all his kingdom, for it's vast, all women will give what? Honor to their husbands. What a joke. You can't give honor out of fear and strong arm it and bulldoze it out of somebody by brute force. That's ridiculous. Now, if Christian husbands were really more like Christ, then I think their wives would probably be more ready to respect them. But this is really a futile regulation. And that's what verse 21 and 22 talk about. So can you see any comical irony in this? What do you see that's total bananas about issuing this decree? Anything? It's definitely not enforceable. Yeah. What's that? Yeah. It's not realistic. Yeah, the law doesn't stop it from being known. In fact, the funny thing is that he ends up publicizing the embarrassing event and then spreading it to his entire kingdom. That's the ridiculous part about it. So what he fears, he puts into action. He actually causes the embarrassing incompetence to be spread everywhere. A part of the royal decree is to document the story, put it in everyone's language, and then use the entire Persian Empire force, the Pony Express, to spread it across everywhere. Go tell everyone this royal decree. I'm a loser. Don't let it happen to you. That's what it is. He assures what will happen, what he fears by sending this out. And this is before Google Translate, and he is putting it in everybody's language, spreading it out. This is like the Persian Facebook version. He's like spreading out everywhere. Write it in the decree. Send it out to everybody. This is what happened to me. This is like a comedy. It's designed to show us that he's not really in control. And so again, you can see that the point is that his decree exposes what he has desired to conceal. And what does that fit with the theme that we see throughout the book of Esther? This is a reversal, right? What he tried to conceal is reversed with exposure. He doesn't want people to know about this, but he ends up telling everybody by the decree. But what's funny is that it doesn't spread through gossip like what Melissa was talking about. They're going to find out anyway, right? That would be gossip. They don't find out through gossip alone. They find out by his own decree. And so that's funny. That is funny. And what does God want us to observe by this? I'm going to do this whole occurrence throughout chapter 1. What are some things that you think God wants us to observe I mean, the author is really mocking worldly power in so many ways. We've seen that from beginning to end. He's revealing the inability of the world's power to really give the final destiny for God's people. The world power can't do that. They can't even govern themselves. Powerful men are being outwitted by their own fears and their own arrogance. They're afraid of stuff. They're outwitted by themselves. And this is kind of the same world we live in today. It can be a dangerous place. It can be scary when power and wisdom are disconnected. Isn't that, I mean, there's a lot of world's leaders and rulers like this where there's power and wisdom. You want them to be together. They're often just disconnected. And we see that here, and we can often see that in our lives today. And maybe we'll go somewhere with that, but first I'll ask, before we get into like applications that I've thought of, what do you guys see from this passage? What do you guys see, or things that have made an impression on you, or things that you've learned, or anything? Yeah, Jordan.
I like that at one point you mentioned in a desperate intent for power and control, that's when the weakness is seen.
Hmm.
That's part of the reversal theme of the book. And I think that's so evident in our own lives. When you see people in intent to grab power and have control, it's when their flaws shine brightest. And you see it in this upcoming election. You see these politicians talk about what they're going to do, and then something else comes out that they said that's completely opposite, or their flaws are seen in their intent for power. I thought that was an interesting point.
Yeah, that can happen in so many arenas. Politically, it can happen in the home. It can happen in a lot of different contexts too. Yeah. Anything else? Yeah, Susie.
Maybe it's been mentioned before, but Vashti didn't come to the kingly call, but Esther came and she wasn't.
Yeah.
And as you've been talking about, I thought that's an interesting aspect of how God is, and he's obviously working through all of that.
Yeah, and on top of that, Vashti is rejected for not coming, and Esther is accepted when not called. Yeah, that's another one. You're skipping ahead a lot of chapters.
When I saw the one, I had to see the other.
Yeah.
Public policy can't change a human heart.
Yeah, that is like such a futile effort to try and do that. Now, do you think the people who are at this party, do you think they really know what's going on in the long, grand scheme of things? Absolutely not. How much less do we know of what's happening on our day-to-day lives? If you're at this party and you're just thinking that this is just an argument between two people, right? If you're there, you're just thinking, this is just an argument between one man and one what happens to be the king, happens to be the queen. And you're thinking, well, certainly this doesn't have much long-lasting consequences. This is just an argument. Who cares that she didn't come, right? But this story tells us that there is nothing insignificant that's taking place in your life, even right now. Remember last week we were talking about these 5-second decisions that can have long-lasting ramifications and consequences. And sometimes we just have to wait to see what God is doing. That's what these people have to do. Which verse in Esther 1 is God mentioned? Not at all, right? In fact, where is God in Esther 1? The book intentionally opens with a view that this world seemingly is under the control of evil men, of world empires. It's seemingly without God, ruled by evil men who don't know him. And so since we can't see him working in Esther 1, does that mean that he's not working? Come on, Aunt, talk to me. No, definitely not. And what's amazing is that through these secular events, right, because Ahasuerus is not a God worshiper, and Vashti is not a God worshiper. Through these secular events even, God is moving history forward, even through their own wicked or personal motives. And so The struggle with us is that we often also can't see what God is doing, and it's not obvious to us. How many people in Esther 1, how many Jews, let's just pick on this people group, how many Jews in Esther 1 are saying, thank God that Ahasuerus got overly drunk that seventh day? No one is saying that. How many of God's people are saying, thank God that Vashti has been dumped? No one's saying that. But guess what? In 10 years, they will be. You realize that? This is one book, but it covers a long span of time. And what the author is doing is taking us back 10 years before to say, how was there even an opening for Esther to step in? God was orchestrating this through just secular events taking place. And from our perspective, we're like, where's God? Where's God in this? Where's God in this? And in Esther's case, and the people of God during Esther's time in Persia, it takes 10 years to figure it out. Oh, so that's how Esther got into place. Oh, God's hand was actually operative then, and we had no idea. And that's what I meant by sometimes you just have to wait. We always have to wait to see what God is doing. But what seems like insignificant, self-contained drama between one man and one woman actually stretches far to the salvation and survival of God's people. Do you realize that? That is amazing. I mean, who would have thought just this little domestic dispute stretches to the survival of God's people? God's amazing. Yeah, Randy.
I was thinking too, you've got, before that, you have the law Medes and Persian, where it's written in stone, basically the laws are. And if there hadn't even been that, then when he sobered up, he probably wouldn't have actually, he would have probably reversed all that and brought Ashley back. And that would have changed everything too.
Yeah, right. So I bring this up because I want to challenge you to think about your own life. Think about the seemingly insignificant events in your life that have led you to where you are today. Can't you see God's hand working in ways before? That may have just seemed really trivial, but you don't know it till hindsight, right? You say, I can look back at my life and say, man, why am I in the occupational field, the vocation that I'm in? Well, I had influence from one of my grandpas that was into technology and tool and die, and that was interesting to me, and I wanted to do that, and then I wanted to go to engineering school, and I wanted to learn boogie woogie on the piano. So I was like, I think I'll learn that because that's fun to play. And I didn't know God was going to use that kind of skill or ability later down the road, I think I'll go to engineering school. And that's where I met my wife, and she was stalking me there. And it was like, after that, but before that, I broke my leg, and that changed a huge course in my life. I broke my femur, and that paused a series of events that would have otherwise taken place. And it's like I can look back in hindsight and say, and God, you have providentially been orchestrating so many events through things that are seemingly insignificant, but they aren't. They aren't, friends, big and small. God's active providence is controlling the events to lead you along. And so, even evil leaders like Ahasuerus in powerful positions of influence, think about an illness or a disease. These are things that God uses. Think back to John 9, the guy who's born blind, and Jesus says, this guy was born blind like that for the glory of God. And think of Lazarus dying in John 11. He says, this is not an illness that leads to death, but to the glory of God. And so these are things that we see in hindsight, but not necessarily right before us. Will God stretch our faith? Yes. Will God drive us to our knees? Yes. So we need to pray for help from God to help us trust him in these seasons, like in these seasons that the Jews will be going throughout the book of Esther. and then to rest patiently in God's wisdom. And so that's the first thing that I wanted to bring out, that we just have to wait to see what God is doing often. And in these moments of trouble, really, when there's no visible sign of divine, miraculous intervention to change the circumstances, does that mean that God is absent? No. He's working in these events, right? There's no lightning bolt coming down saying, this is why Vashti's been removed. They don't know. It's just happening. The second thing, and this is a little bit less, well, it's a sub-point in this passage that we read, but it's something that we've all recognized, is that respect and honor cannot be decreed or forced. It can't be by brute force, right? I mean, those who attempt to over-regulate in a way to get this type of power, I mean, they are anxious for losing it. Think domestically. So in all families, there's a lot of wives here. How about I ask you, what increases your readiness to honor your husband? If Congress passed a law, would you feel more ready? No, right? What might it be? What might it be?
His action. Like how he is towards you. How much he loves you. He's there with you. You're going to respond to that.
Yeah, there's this reciprocal aspect, right? Yeah, exactly. This is what we read in Ephesians 5, and which Pastor Tig has gone through a couple of Sundays ago. This reciprocal aspect. Husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church. And then the wives, honor and respect, submit to their husbands. This is a flow. So that's why I mention husbands. If we were more Christ-like and loving more like Christ, I think that our wives would be more ready to honor their husbands. This is not something let's not be little memucons, okay, issuing decrees and suggesting that we need to enforce this by an act of Congress. That's ridiculous. Think politically. The author here is quite cynical, don't you think, about the powers of the way that chapter 1 happens. You're really beginning to wonder, are these people really even in control? Like, this is bananas activity, right? And so you're really beginning to question, who's really in control? These bozos surely aren't, right? And sometimes laws are issued by, I don't know, megalomaniac needs of these needy people, like Memucan, I think. And often, though, leaders are compelled to issue laws by their own fears. I think Memucan was probably like that. I'm afraid that all the women will hear about it. But there's something you should know, that always, leaders are flawed. All of them. It doesn't matter. I mean, we can really look back at history and say, these leaders were incredible. They're all flawed. And the point that I think the author is making by showing all these flawed leaders is that we are desperate for a king greater than Ahasuerus, right? There is a king who is greater than Ahasuerus, and we submit and serve to him. And this is like an underlying theme that we see throughout Scripture, but there's a perfect king with a perfect character, and we are happy to submit and yield to his authority because there's only one perfect king, Jesus. He's been crowned as Son of Man, King of Kings, and Lord of Lords. But this king, Jesus, he doesn't serve out of fear and out of anxiety or in a megalomaniac way. Rather, he serves by meeting the needs of those he lovingly governs. Do you hear that? He serves those whom he lovingly governs. That's awesome. We serve a king who has washed feet. John 13. You won't find that in Ahasuerus, right? We serve a king who died on a cross and experienced the wrath of God, but at the same time a king who has risen from the dead and ascended into heaven and intercedes for us and will return for us. And so these are distinctions that we see. And so Jesus Christ alone is the king who has absolute power and authority. We see these types of contrasts as we go through the book. Well, that kind of wraps up what I've got for Esther 1. What are some final thoughts you guys have? Anything? Yeah, Tim.
Such an encouragement in the fight against the fear of man too, because you would think, like, okay, what if my boss doesn't like me if I say this Christian thing at work? They might fire me. And it's like, well, who's the one who's in control? Or, my friends might all leave me if they think that I have this weird thing about me. And it's like, well, God is orchestrating every detail of your life, so he's the one that we fear.
Yeah, I think that's very empowering. Yeah. I agree. And it's those types of things that we fear in the moment. But it's like down the road, you can see God moving in those ways. Yeah. How about anything else? Oh, yeah, Nick.
When you were talking about the decree that Melanchthon was suggesting, and it seems like super obvious to us that it's ridiculous, right? It's interesting because I think about, to them, they were like, oh yeah, this is great, like, this is awesome. Let's do this. Everyone's like on board with it because we don't hear about anyone saying otherwise, right? So it made me think about in James, as we're getting ready for the Saturday study for the men and stuff, we're reading through and they talk about the difference between godly wisdom and demonic wisdom.
Mm.
So the demonic wisdom in chapter 3 says, if you have bitter envy and self-seeking in your hearts, do not boast and lie against the truth. This wisdom does not descend from above, but is earthly, sensual, demonic. For where envy and self-seeking exist, confusion and every evil thing are there. But the wisdom that is from above is first pure, then peaceful, gentle, willing to yield, full of mercy and good fruits. So just that idea of this is the type of wisdom that exists.
Mm-hmm.
And we see it in the world all the time. This demonic wisdom that people are like, yeah, this is awesome, what a great idea. And we're like testing it against the word of God, saying, absolutely not. This is bananas.
Yeah.
But they really think it's great.
Yeah.
God uses that regardless to accomplish his purposes, even though we're like, how is this being allowed? How can people possibly think this is a good idea?
I know. Yeah, that's an excellent point. Yeah, that not only is this manipulated wisdom, this demonically imposed wisdom that is thriving in the world, God is using that still to accomplish his ends. Yeah, what a great connection. I'm glad you pointed that out for those who are following along in James 2 from chapter 3. How about anything else? Yeah, Melissa.
I just keep noticing how pride is so self-serving.
Mm-hmm.
When we're proud, our focus is solely on ourselves and not others and the effect it might have. And that's what both the M dude and Esther, that's all they're focused on, is their own self-serving purposes and not even caring to about anybody else.
Mm-hmm.
Pride is just a horrible thing.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's what you see from these leaders, especially Ahasuerus, who wields tremendous power and very little care for the consequences to others. It's just...
They reacted out of fear. First of all, they were drunk, and then they exaggerated what the problem was. And so out of fear, they came up with this crazy thing. But then I'm thinking in our own life, when things happen to us, we tend, if we're acting out of fear, we exaggerate the problem as well. And so it's a lesson to me when things happen that don't really seem to make sense, or I don't like, or I don't want to happen, to not react in fear, but to react with trust and faith that, like you said, that God is up to something. And it's hard when you're in the moment of that, because they were all caught up in the whole scene. And as we are, when things happen to us that we don't seem to be fair or whatever, but to react in faith and trust in God's sovereignty and providence, then how they did out of fear exaggerate the problem.
Yes, right. When we don't know, pray and trust. Pray and trust. All right, well, when we return next week, we'll look at all of Esther chapter 2. So let me encourage you to read chapter 2 and be on the lookout for where you see God's active providence taking place. It's a little more obvious there. All right, let's pray. Lord, we love you, and we're encouraged by the reading of your word, which gives us an instruction on your dealings with what appears to be seemingly insignificant events, but we know and realize that there is nothing insignificant. That you are active in our lives and in this world. Help us to trust you more and give us peace to rest in your ultimate power and control. In Jesus' name, amen.